The land stretched wide and lonely, a place where silence carried weight and every sound held meaning. Out on the edge of the frontier, the wind moved across the dry grass like whispers, brushing through cedar and mesquite. Dust lifted under the hooves of wild horses in the distance, while the sun fell heavy against the earth. This was no gentle land. It was a place where survival demanded more than strength. It asked for courage, wit, and the will to keep breathing when everything around seemed set against you. She had learned that truth quickly. Her journey had begun with hope, a chance at building a new life in the West. But hope had turned to fear the day her world shattered. Raiders had come, swift and merciless, and she had run with nothing but the clothes on her back and the pounding of her heart. For days she had hidden among the rocks, slipping between canyons, crouching low in the brush whenever shadows moved on the horizon. The Apaches knew these lands better than anyone. She knew she was prey, and the thought clawed at her every waking moment. Her hands bore scratches from thorn bushes, her lips cracked from thirst. At night, when the desert air turned cold, she wrapped her arms around herself, pressing into the hard earth as though it might keep her safe.
Ow.
Every sound of an owl or a coyote made her breath hitch. The thought of being found filled her with dread, yet the loneliness pressed down heavier with each passing hour. Hunger gnawed at her belly. Her legs, once strong, felt weak with each step. Yet still, she pressed on, clinging to life with all the stubborn will left inside her. What kept her going was not just survival, but memory. The memory of the family she had lost, of voices silenced in fire and chaos. Their absence pushed her forward. She refused to fall, not while breath still lingered in her chest. She told herself she would outlast the desert, outlast fear, and outlast those hunting her. But deep down, she wondered if the earth itself had already chosen her fate. The Apaches moved like shadows, unseen until they wished to be. She had heard stories of their skill, of their silence, how they could read the ground like a book, knowing who had passed by and how long ago. She knew her footprints betrayed her, no matter how careful she tried to be. She tried walking in streams when she could, crouching low when she crossed open land, covering her tracks with broken branches. But she could feel it, the weight of being followed, the sense of eyes upon her when the sun burned high or when the moon rose pale above the hills. Each morning, she prayed for just one more day unseen. Yet the days stretched into nights, and the fear became a constant companion. She began to wonder what was worse, being caught or living endlessly with the terror of knowing it could happen at any moment. The land itself felt like a test. The riverbeds were dry, cracked like old leather, forcing her to dig shallow holes for a few drops of muddy water. The rocks burned hot beneath her palms by day and chilled her bones by night. The hawks circled above, as if waiting for her to fall. Still she pressed on, whispering to herself in the quiet, giving herself the strength to take another step. Then came the morning when she woke to silence so heavy it pressed against her chest. No bird called, no wind stirred.
All the air itself seemed to wait.
She crouched low, straining to listen. Her pulse beat hard in her ears. Slowly she turned her head, scanning the rocks and brush around her. Nothing. Yet the feeling grew stronger that she was no longer alone. Her breath caught as she spotted a mark in the dirt nearby, half hidden by leaves. A footprint, fresh, larger than her own. She froze, staring at it, her mind racing. She wanted to run, yet her legs trembled too much to carry her far. She knew it now beyond doubt. They had found her trail. Her heart hammered as she slid back against a boulder, trying to make herself small. She gripped the edge of the rock, her fingernails digging into the stone. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. Every instinct told her to stay still, to pray the desert might hide her just a little longer. Minutes dragged like hours. A rustle of brush sounded to her left, faint but sharp. Her eyes darted toward it, and for a moment she thought she saw movement, just the faintest shape against the land. Her mouth went dry. She pressed herself tighter against the stone, her body tense as a drawn bowstring. Then the silence broke with a voice, deep, calm, certain. The words carried through the air without anger, yet with a weight that made her blood run cold. "I found you." Her head turned slowly, and there he stood, the Apache chief. His figure rose against the fading light, tall and steady, his eyes fixed on her. He had no need to raise a weapon, for his presence alone held her frozen in place. The long search was over. The desert had given her up. Her chest tightened, torn between fear and relief that the waiting was done. She could not read his face, could not guess his intent. All she knew was that the moment she had dreaded had finally come. The chase was finished. Now she would learn what fate awaited her in the hands of the one who had spoken those simple, final words. The sun dipped lower, shadows growing long across the land. She swallowed hard, her throat tight, her body trembling. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unanswered questions. Her mind screamed for escape, yet her body remained rooted, unable to move under the weight of his gaze. The desert wind rose at last, carrying dust across the canyon floor. Still neither of them moved. The moment hung, fragile as glass, with her life balanced in the stillness. And she knew this was only the beginning. The air between them seemed to thicken, as though the desert itself was holding its breath. She could hear her own pulse, fast and uneven, thudding in her ears. The Apache chief stood still, his figure framed by the fading sun, his expression calm but unreadable. He did not move toward her, nor did he lift his hand in threat, yet his presence carried the weight of certainty. He had hunted her with patience, tracked her across stone and sand, and now that he had spoken, there was no question that the chase was over. Her body trembled, though she tried to steady herself. She wanted to speak, to say something, anything, that might shift the moment in her favor, but no words came. Her throat was too dry, her tongue too heavy. She pressed back harder against the rock, as though it might swallow her whole and hide her from his gaze, yet she knew it was useless. He had found her. The chief's eyes remained fixed on her, dark and sharp, but there was no rush in him. He carried himself like the desert patient, certain, unshaken by fear or need. She wondered how long he had been following, how many times he had been close, while she believed herself hidden. Ow! The thought chilled her. A hawk cried above, circling low, and her eyes flicked toward the sound before returning to him. In that short breath of distraction, memories rushed into her mind. She thought of the journey that had led her here, the wagon rattling across endless plains, the small group of travelers clinging to the hope of land and freedom, the laughter around campfires when nights still felt safe. She thought of the morning when safety ended, when fire and chaos broke across the camp, screams, shouts, the sudden fear as the Apaches descended. She had run without looking back, her feet pounding across open ground, carrying nothing but fear in her chest. She had never stopped running since. She did not know how many days had passed. The sun had risen and fallen so many times, each day blending into the next. Hunger, thirst, exhaustion, they had been her only companions. She had believed the desert might take her before the Apaches ever could. But now she knew her flight had always been leading here, to this moment, to this man standing before her. The chief took a step forward, slow and measured. She flinched, her hands curling into fists, though she had nothing to defend herself with. Her eyes darted to the ground, to the rocks at her feet, to anything that might serve as a weapon. But she knew even if she grasped one, it would be nothing against him. He carried no fear. He carried the certainty of someone who understood both the land and his own power within it. Still, he did not raise a hand against her. His voice came again, calm, steady, carrying an authority that left no room for doubt. He spoke words she did not fully understand, the language foreign to her ear, yet the tone was clear. He was not asking, he was telling. She was his captive now, no matter what, the desert whispered, no matter how hard her heart pounded with refusal. Her breath came fast, shallow and uneven. She wanted to turn and run again, to throw herself into the brush and flee. but she knew what her body could no longer deny. She was too weak to spent. Her legs shook beneath her, and her arms felt like little more than fragile sticks. She had run as far as she could. The land had stripped her of strength, and now the one who had pursued her stood ready to claim what was left. And yet, beneath the fear, another feeling stirred. It was not safety, not trust, but it was curiosity. The chief's eyes did not burn with the rage she had expected. He did not strike her down where she stood, nor did he call out for others to come forward. He simply looked at her as though she was something to be studied, something to be weighed and considered. She wondered why. She had heard tales whispered by travelers of raids, of captives taken, of lives ended swiftly and without mercy. Yet here she was, still breathing, still standing, though she could feel the world swaying under her weak legs. Why had he not ended her flight the moment he found her? What did he see in her that stayed his hand? The silence stretched again, broken only by the sound of the wind shifting across the canyon. Slowly he lifted his hand, not in threat, but as though signaling for her to rise from where she crouched. She hesitated, her body tense, her mind screaming not to obey. But something in his eyes pressed against her will, urging her to move. Her legs shook as she pushed herself upright, every muscle aching from days of strain. She swayed slightly, catching herself against the rock, her breath ragged. The chief stood steady, watching, his face still unreadable. She wondered if he saw weakness, or if he saw something else, something she could not yet name. Her mind raced with questions, but her lips could not form them. Who was he beyond the title of chief? Why had he tracked her so far? What did he intend now that she stood before him? The answers lingered just beyond reach, hidden in the silence between them. As the last light of day slipped away, the desert grew colder. Shadows lengthened across the ground, and the stars began to prick the sky. She shivered, though whether from the cold or from fear she could not tell. The chief did not move closer, yet his presence seemed to fill the space between them. He did not need to advance. He'd already closed the distance with his certainty. Her thoughts flickered back to the faces she had lost, to the sound of her father's voice, to the warmth of her mother's hand. She clung to those memories as though they might shield her, as though they might remind her of who she was before the desert and before this moment. Yet even as she remembered, she felt those ties slipping like water through her fingers. The world she had known was gone, and only this new reality remained. The chief finally turned his head, his gaze shifting across the horizon, as though scanning for something unseen. She dared to draw a deeper breath in that moment, her chest aching with the need for air. But the reprieve was short. His eyes came back to her, steady and sharp, and the weight of his attention pinned her once again. She swallowed hard, her voice at last breaking through the silence, though faint and trembling. "Why me?" she whispered, the words raw and cracked from days without water. His expression did not change. If he understood, he gave no sign. Or perhaps he chose not to answer. Either way, the silence that followed pressed heavier than words ever could. The desert night gathered around them, and she felt the ground beneath her grow colder. The wind carried the smell of sage and dust, sharp and dry in her nose. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, its lonely sound echoing across the canyon. She shivered again, folding her arms tightly against herself. The chief stood unmoved, his figure steady in the dim light. He seemed a part of the land itself, unshaken, unyielding, as eternal as the rocks and sky. She realized then that her fate was no longer her own. It belonged to him now, as surely as the desert belonged to the wind. Her body ached with exhaustion, her mind frayed by fear and hunger, yet her spirit still whispered to fight. Did not know how or when, but some spark inside her refused to die. She would not surrender fully. Not yet. The chief's voice came once more, low and steady, a sound that seemed to carry the desert's own rhythm. He spoke again in words she could not understand, but this time there was a finality to them, a weight that told her resistance would mean nothing here. And as the stars spread across the black sky above, she knew her journey into the unknown had only just begun. The desert had not claimed her, the Apaches had. And whatever fate waited in the shadows of their world, she could no longer turn back. The night deepened. The stars spread wide across the sky like scattered embers. The desert had a way of swallowing sound, but here and there she could hear the faint scrape of a stone, the rustle of brush, the quiet presence of life that moved even when unseen. The Apache chief remained steady, his figure outlined by moonlight, watching her with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare. She could not tell if he saw her as a threat, a burden, or something else entirely. Her legs shook, not only from fear but from exhaustion, and at last she slid down to the cold ground, pulling her knees tight against her chest. She expected him to strike her for such a weakness, to bark orders or drag her to her feet. Instead, he simply shifted his weight and stood guard as though her collapse was nothing more than part of the plan. That unsettled her more than any raised weapon would have. Time stretched. Her eyes grew heavy, though her heart would not let her sleep. Each time her lids fluttered closed, the images returned: fire, screams, the sudden attack on the wagon, the cries of her kin as she fled. Guilt pressed heavy. She had run while others had stayed, while others had faced what she had been too afraid to endure. She told herself she could not have helped them, that she would have died too, yet the thought brought no comfort. Now she sat before the very people who had torn her world apart, wondering why her life had been spared when others had been taken. At some point, she heard faint movement in the dark, and her body tensed again. Figures emerged from the shadows, silent as smoke. She realized then that the chief had not been alone. Others had been waiting nearby, their patience endless. She counted 3, maybe 4, slipping into the faint light, their eyes fixed on her. They did not speak, only looked to their leader, waiting. The chief gave a single nod, and with that, they moved closer. Her breath caught as one of them knelt and held out a skin of water. She hesitated, fear warring with desperate thirst. Her lips were cracked, her throat raw, yet she could not bring herself to trust the offer. Still, the skin was pressed closer, and instinct overpowered hesitation. She drank greedily, water spilling down her chin, and for a moment it felt like life itself flowed back into her body. When she finished, the Apache drew the skin back without a word. That small act twisted her thoughts. Why give her water? Why keep her alive when ending her would have been simpler? It planted questions that gnawed at her even as the fear remained sharp. The small group spoke softly among themselves in a language she could not follow. Their words rose and fell like the rhythm of wind through canyon walls, sharp at times, then soft, then sharp again. Every now and then, their eyes flicked to her, measuring. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself, wishing she could vanish into the earth. When dawn came, pale and sharp against the horizon, they set her on her feet. Her body protested with every step, but she was given no choice. The chief walked ahead, steady, silent, while 2 others kept close behind her. Their presence pressed against her back, not cruel but firm, leaving no room for escape. She thought briefly of breaking into a run, but the thought faded quickly. Her legs would not carry her far, and even if they did, the desert belonged to them. She could not outpace shadows. The journey stretched through barren stretches of rock and brush, the land both harsh and haunting in its beauty. The sun rose higher, burning hot on her skin, yet the Apaches moved with ease, their steps light and unhurried. They seemed at home, where she felt only suffering. Each cactus, each dry riverbed, each shifting wind seemed known to them, as if the land itself whispered secrets into their ears. With every mile, her fear deepened. Where were they taking her? Would she be brought before more of them, judged and condemned? Or was her fate already sealed, and the walk merely a passage toward its end? Yet as hours passed, she began to notice something strange. Not all the eyes upon her burned with hostility. Some carried curiosity, the same look the chief had given her when he first stepped into view. She wondered what they saw in her that made them pause. A survivor? An intruder? A puzzle? That curiosity unsettled her more than hatred would have. Hatred she could understand. Curiosity carried with it unknown intentions, and unknown intentions bred fear of another kind. As night fell again, they camped in a narrow canyon, the fire small and controlled, its light flickering against the stone walls. She sat apart, her wrists bound with leather thongs, though loosely enough to remind her that she lived at their mercy. They shared food among themselves, strips of dried meat and roasted roots pulled from the earth, and though her stomach ached with hunger, she told herself she would not take what they offered. Yet when the chief himself placed a piece of meat before her, she hesitated only a moment before eating. Pride was hollow when her belly was empty. While they ate, the group spoke quietly, their voices blending with the crackle of fire. She could not understand the words, but she caught tones frustration from one, calm certainty from another. It seemed they were not all of one mind about her. She wondered if some wished her gone, if others argued to keep her. That thought kept her awake long after the fire burned low, her eyes tracing the stars while fear twisted in her chest. Somewhere in those hours, her mind turned to the chief himself, carried himself with a quiet authority that the others respected without question. His silence was not emptiness but weight, and when he spoke, the others listened. She wondered what kind of man he was beyond the title of leader. What had shaped him? What had he seen? What battles had he fought to become the figure standing between her life and her death? As the days passed, her strength began to return, though the fear never left. Each morning they moved on deeper into the land she did not know, and each night they camped with the same sharp caution. She started to notice details she had missed before, the way they read tracks on the ground, the way they marked direction by stars, the way they moved together like parts of one body. There was a rhythm to their lives, a connection to the land that made her feel both small and out of place. At times, she caught them studying her in silence, as if she too were a track on the ground, a mark to be read and understood. The thought unsettled her, yet it also sparked the faintest ember of defiance. She would not let them decide who she was without knowing the truth. Still, she said little. Her words would mean nothing to them, and fear pressed her voice down into silence. Instead, she listened, learning their tones, their patterns, storing away scraps of knowledge. She did not know why she did it, only that survival demanded more than breath alone. The conflict that pressed hardest against her chest was not just fear of death, but fear of what came if death did not arrive. What place would she have among them if they chose to keep her? Would she remain forever a stranger, bound and watched, or would her fate twist in ways she could not yet see? On the fifth night, as the fire burned low and the others drifted in to sleep, she looked across the flames at the chief. He sat apart, his eyes reflecting the light, steady and unreadable as always. For a long moment their gazes held, and she felt something shift within her. Fear still gnawed, but alongside it grew a new question. Why had he spared her when he had every chance not to? The answer did not come. It lingered in the silence, heavy and unspoken, and she knew that until it was revealed, she would never know whether she had been saved or captured by something far more dangerous than she could imagine. The journey carried her deeper into lands that felt more foreign with every step. Days bled into one another, the heat of the sun pressing down by day and the chill creeping in by night. The Apaches moved with ease through all of it, their feet light on the ground, their eyes always scanning the horizon. She struggled to keep pace, each mile pulling at the last threads of her strength.
Oh.
Yet she sensed they would not let her fall behind. Each time her steps slowed too much, a hand motioned her forward, firm but silent. Her fear never left, but it began to twist into something sharper as the campfires grew more frequent and the company larger. With every passing day, she saw more of them men, women, children, appearing like shadows from canyons and hillsides. She realized she was being carried into the heart of something far larger than she had imagined. This was no passing raid. This was their home, their ground, their world, and she was being brought into it against her will. The chief remained the center of it all. He walked with quiet authority, and the others moved with respect around him. When he looked at her, she still felt that same piercing weight, as though he could see through every layer of her fear and exhaustion. Yet there were moments brief, flickering when his gaze carried something other than cold certainty. She could not name it, but it left her restless, her thoughts circling through the night when sleep would not come. Whispers grew louder among the people as she was led through their hidden camps. Children stared with wide eyes, their small fingers pointing before being hushed by mothers. Warriors regarded her with hard suspicion, their voices sharp as they spoke in words she could not understand. She felt their judgment pressing against her skin like heat from the fire. Some wanted her gone. She could feel it. Others seemed to question why she remained alive at all. The conflict in their eyes was clear, and the weight of it settled heavy in her chest. Each night, the firelight revealed more of the tension that surrounded her. Some of the warriors argued openly, their voices carrying sharp edges into the dark. She could not understand the language, but the tone told enough: anger, distrust, impatience. More than once, a hand had drifted to the hilt of a blade, only to be stilled by the presence of the chief. His words seemed to be the only thing that stood between her and a fate she dared not imagine. And so her mind wrestled with questions. Why did he protect her? What did he see in her that the others did not? Each time she searched his face for answers, he gave none, his silence a wall she could not climb. Yet the mystery burned within her, adding to the fire of suspense that already consumed her days. The land itself added to the weight of fear. Canyons swallowed them whole, cliffs rising on either side like prison walls. The nights grew darker, the stars sharp and cold above her. Coyotes called in the distance, their cries twisting into the silence until her skin prickled. She felt trapped not only by the people around her, but by the land itself, as if every stone and shadow had turned against her. Still, she could not silence the small ember of resistance in her chest. It flickered each time she saw weakness in their watch, each time she wondered if escape might yet be possible. She studied the paths they took, the way they chose their camps, the distance between one guard and another. She counted steps, measured shadows, clung to the faint hope that if the moment came, she could still run. But that ember burned against a stronger flame-to-growing pull of the unknown. The chief's silence, his decision to keep her alive, the conflict among his people, all of it wound around her like threads she could not break. She felt herself drawn deeper into a story she did not understand, one that seemed to press toward a breaking point with each passing night. It was on the seventh evening that the tension sharpened beyond anything she had felt before. They camped in a narrow valley, the cliffs rising high on both sides, the fire crackling low in the center. The people gathered close, their voices low but urgent. She sat apart, bound at the wrists, her eyes fixed on the shifting flames. The air carried a weight that made her chest tighten. Something was coming. She could feel it as surely as the desert felt the storm before it broke. The chief sat across from her, his face lit in half-shadow by the fire. His eyes never left her. Around him, the warriors argued, their voices rising louder than usual. She caught fragments of their emotion even without the words anger, fear, impatience, distrust. More than once, their eyes cut toward her, sharp and accusing. It was her they debated, she was certain of it. Her fate hung in the air, each voice another stone thrown upon the scale. The fire popped, sending sparks into the night. Her breath quickened as one of the warriors rose to his feet, his words spilling out like a challenge. His eyes burned into hers, and for the first time she felt the full force of their hatred directed at her alone. He stepped closer, his hand gripping the hilt of his knife, the firelight glinting against the blade. Her body stiffened, her heart hammering. She wanted to shrink back, to disappear into the earth, but the cliff walls gave no escape. The others rose as well, voices rising with the flames, the air electric with fury. She knew then that whatever fragile protection the chief had given her was on the edge of breaking. Yet the chief did not move. He sat steady, his gaze locked on hers, his silence louder than the shouts around him. His eyes carried no fear, no rush, only that same heavy weight she had felt since the first moment he found her. It was as though he was testing something in her, waiting to see if she would bend or stand beneath the storm. The warrior with the knife stepped closer still, his shadow looming over her. The fire roared, voices clashed, and the night seemed to close in tighter. She could feel the tension stretching thin, ready to snap at any heartbeat. Her breath came fast, her chest tight, her mind screaming for some answer, some way to turn the tide. The desert air pressed against her skin, hot and suffocating, while the cliff walls echoed every sound back into her bones. The moment balanced on a knife's edge, her fate hanging in the balance between the fury of the people and the silence of their chief. And as the flames burned brighter, she knew the next heartbeat could change everything. The blade glinted in the firelight, the shouts around her rising like thunder against the canyon walls. Her heart beat so hard she thought it might burst, and every muscle in her body tensed as if bracing for the final blow. Yet before the knife could fall, the chief rose from where he had been sitting. His movement was not rushed, but it carried a force stronger than any shout. The air shifted. The voices felt quieter. The warrior with the knife froze in his steps, his body rigid as the chief's eyes locked on him. The silence that followed pressed heavier than the fire's crackle. The chief spoke then, his voice low but filled with weight, each word striking like a hammer against stone. Though she could not understand the language, the meaning was clear. His command left no room for challenge. Slowly the warrior's grip loosened on the blade until it hung useless at his side. Then, with a sharp sound that echoed frustration, he turned and stepped back into the circle of light, his shadow retreating from her. Her chest heaved as she drew a long, shaky breath. The fire cast the chief's figure tall against the canyon wall, his authority unshaken. She realized then that his silence these many nights had not been weakness. It had been power, the kind that needed no shouting, no blade, to bend the will of others. The people murmured, their anger cooling, though she could still feel the suspicion in their eyes. She was not welcome among them, that much was certain, yet she was alive, and she knew it was only because of him. That night, long after the voices quieted and the camp fell into uneasy sleep, she sat awake under the stars. Questions burned inside her. Why had he spared her when the others wanted her gone? Why had he spoken for her, again and again, when it would have been easier to let her fall? She looked toward him, seated apart near the fire, his face steady in the glow. He seemed as much a mystery now as he had the first moment he had spoken the words, "I found you." In the days that followed, the tension did not vanish, but it softened. She was no longer bound at the wrists, though she remained closely watched. She walked among them, learning their rhythm, seeing their lives unfold in ways she had not imagined. Women gathered roots in ground corn, children played near the riverbeds, old men spoke with wisdom carried in every word. It was a world built not only on war, as she had once believed, but on survival, tradition, and the quiet strength of family. Still, whispers followed her. The memory of that night by the fire lingered in the eyes of those who looked her way. She carried it with her, too, the knowledge that her presence had nearly torn them apart. And yet she also carried something else, the slow realization that she was no longer just prey to be hunted. She had become part of a story much larger than her own, a story written across this land long before she had set foot upon it. The chief spoke little, yet his actions said more than words ever could. When she stumbled, he offered water. When she faltered in fear, his steady gaze urged her onward. She began to see that his protection was not born of pity, but of choice she still did not fully understand. It was only after many days, when they reached the heart of their land, that the truth began to unfold. The people gathered in a wide circle, the fire tall in the center, the air heavy with smoke and silence. Elders spoke, their voices calm but firm, their eyes on the chief. She understood nothing of their words, but she understood the moment. It was judgment, and she was at its center. Her body tensed as the circle closed around her, as voices rose and fell like waves. The people debated her fate, some calling for mercy, others for punishment. She could see it in their faces, feel it in their eyes. She was the stranger in their midst, the reminder of a world that pressed against theirs with wagons, guns, and fences. At last, the chief rose. His words cut through the air with certainty, his presence silencing the debate. He spoke long and steady, his voice carrying authority and calm. The people listened. When he finished, no one moved to challenge him. Slowly, the circle broke apart, the fire burning lower as the crowd drifted into the night. She stood frozen, unsure what had been decided, until the chief came to her side. He looked into her eyes, and though no words passed between them, she felt the truth in his gaze. Her life was no longer threatened. The choice had been made. Relief flooded through her, though it carried its own weight. She was alive, but she was no longer free. She would remain with them, bound not by rope, but by the decision of their leader. The thought both comforted and unsettled her. In the days that followed, she began to find small moments of peace. She helped where she could, carrying water, gathering wood, learning by watching the women who worked around her. The children no longer stared with only fear. Some even smiled, daring to approach. She found herself laughing once, soft and brief, at a child's game, and the sound startled her as though it had come from someone else's mouth. Yet the land never let her forget. The desert remained harsh, the nights cold, the wind whispering through the canyons like voices of the past. And though she had found a place, however fragile, among the people, she knew the world beyond their camp still waited. A world of settlers, wagons, and the endless push of the frontier. A world that would one day collide again with this one, as it had on the day her journey began. The chief seemed to understand this too. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, he stood beside her in silence. For a long time they watched the sky, the wind brushing cool across their faces. Finally, he spoke in his low, steady voice. She understood only one word, repeated twice, but the meaning was clear. He was telling her to remember. She carried that word with her, etched into her mind, like the shape of the land itself. Remember? Remember what had been lost, what had been spared, what had been given. When the time came for her to leave, it was not sudden. She had felt it building like a storm on the horizon. The chief led her to the edge of the canyon, where the desert stretched wide and endless before them. He placed water and food in her hands, and for the first time since he had spoken those first words, she saw something in his eyes that softened. It was not farewell in the way she had once known it, but it was an ending all the same. She stepped into the desert once more, the sand cool beneath her feet, the horizon calling her onward. Behind her, the people faded into shadows, their voices carried away by the wind. Ahead lay the unknown, just as it had on the day she first fled. Not now she carried more than fear. She carried memory, strength, and the knowledge that survival was not just about running, but about enduring. The desert did not feel like an enemy anymore. It felt like a teacher, hard but honest, shaping her into something she had not been before. She knew the world ahead would test her again, perhaps harder than ever. Yet she also knew she had faced the eyes of those who hunted her, had stood at the edge of death, and had walked away. Her steps grew steadier as the sun climbed higher, each one carrying her farther from the firelight of the camp and closer to the horizon. She did not know what waited, but she no longer trembled with every sound. She was still afraid, but she was also alive, and in that truth she found her strength. And so her story ended not with silence or with a blade, but with footsteps in the desert, the wide sky above, and the memory of a voice that had once said, "I found you." It was not just the voice of a man, but of the land itself, reminding her that she belonged to its story now as much as it belonged to hers.